strategic project has a set of assumptions about the future context underpinning it. This is what we might call a scenario, for example, but a set of parameters of thinking about the future that makes sense for the strategic project. Some of these may be some of the reasons why the project got the green light in the first place. The project is actually addressing these sorts of future changes. And so it's really important for us to understand that there is a scenario and there is a set of assumptions sitting under every strategic project. But as we know, the world changes and it can change quite dramatically. So if you were a taxi company, for example, about say 15 years ago, and you were thinking of merging with another taxi company, you'd be making a judgment about, well, what's the future of the taxi industry to see whether that particular merger was a good idea or not. And so whether you considered things like changes in social values and technologies, deregulation, the sorts of things that led to Uber and other similar sorts of companies coming into the whole taxi space and disrupting it, would have been some key questions you would have been thinking about that would have underpinned that decision as to whether you're going to merge with a taxi company or not. So your view of the future is consequential in thinking really about these big strategic projects. So this brings me to my second point, and it becomes very difficult of dealing with the sort of novelty and the uncertainty in this sort of emergent complexities to try and predict them. It's not useful in that sort of context. So if you feel the data that you have is going to be relevant for the future, then perhaps you can forecast and model. But that, I think, is very hard in these sorts of emergent complexity situations. I mean, climate change is a classic example of this. What will be the impact of climate change? And we don't have data really from the past that helps us be able to predict or forecast exactly the impact of that. In those contexts, then prediction doesn't become very helpful. And so we're much better off focusing then on how do we build in a robustness to our strategic projects that they actually can deal with a whole range of different things that may happen in the future. So what we're doing with these emergent complexities in strategic projects is shifting from trying to predict or forecast the uncertainty to focusing on making the projects as adaptable and building in a robustness with them. And so what scenario planning is, and scenarios is about, is you have a set of assumptions of the future sitting under your current strategic project. And then we think, well, what are a couple of other scenarios about how the future context could unfold? How could the future unfold that's equally plausible to what we currently understand? And that gives us some contrast then to really think about, well, how is that different from what we are assuming? And that helps us learn about what we might need to do in terms of changing the project to be more robust. And so what we're doing then is taking this strategic project and looking at it in the context of each scenario and seeing what we learn from that. And a really good analogy of this is the aircraft manufacturers, and they have a thing called a wind tunnel. And what they do is they put the model of the plane in front of a wind tunnel, and the wind tunnel is simulating all sorts of weather conditions, because what they're wanting to do is to test the plane to make sure it's robust, that it can fly through every weather condition that it might come across. So this is a really good analogy for scenarios. What we use is the scenarios become the wind tunnel for us to actually then put our strategic project in each of the scenarios and to ask the questions about what do these conditions mean for our particular project? Are there learnings here for us that we need to adapt the project in a certain way to be much more robust, to deal with some sort of change that we're starting to see? But also the scenarios are different frames of the future, so they can also open up all sorts of new opportunities and new options because they give you a new way of seeing the world and seeing the future, and that can often bring an innovation in to a strategic project as well.